You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today, we're beginning a short series designed at helping our husbands see from our perspective. And today's episode is titled The Comparison Exercise. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here. Welcome to today's episode. Today, we're beginning a short series designed to help communicate to your husbands so that they can understand your perspective. I think a lot of times when we are in the situation that we're in with a difficult situation with our in-laws, it's hard for our husbands to hear what we want to say because we get all emotionally wrapped up in it. We bring in a lot of our own baggage. We bring in things that aren't really helpful to the conversation. And so I thought it might be nice if I could be your voice, if I could be someone who can share what you might be feeling, what you might be thinking in a way that maybe is phrased a little bit differently, maybe holds a little bit different weight than you do when speaking with your husband. And so my encouragement, my hope is that you can listen to these episodes and decide, does this apply to the situation that I am in with my in-laws? Because not all of these situations that I bring up may apply. And so my idea is that I can create these, and if they seem to fit your situation, the dynamic that you have with your husband and your in-laws, that you could encourage your husband to listen to this episode so that he can understand a little bit of where you're coming from. And so if you are a husband and your wife has asked you to listen to this, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for validating your wife by just even entertaining the idea of listening to this podcast. If you want to know a little bit of my story, you can go back and listen to the pilot episode, which is episode 1. And it shares kind of my story just a little bit. I don't go into every detail, but my perspective from the daughter-in-law of a very toxic dynamic. I'm not saying that your parents are toxic like my in-laws are. My husband and I have been married 28 years. We have 6 children. 4 of them are adults at this point, and things got really, really bad to the point where I was having physical sickness issues, problems with my hormones because of the chronic stress from many, many, many years of dealing with the stress of dealing with my in-laws. We have dealt with stalking. We have dealt with a myriad of other things. But in the end, praise God, my husband took the lead and set some boundaries that unfortunately his parents did not respect. And now, very, very unfortunately, we are in the situation where we are no contact with his parents, and we have a protective order against them because of their behavior. And I don't want any husbands to think that that is my goal for anybody listening to this podcast. My goal is not to try to convince any wives to tell their husbands that they need to go no contact with any extended family or to take it as far as we had to take it. My goal is to just give your wives a voice, to make them feel seen and validated, and to know that the struggles that they are going through with the relationship with your parents, that's not where they want to be. They don't want to have a tense and stressful and anxiety-provoking relationship with your parents. We really don't. There is nothing more that I would like than to have a healthy, harmonious relationship with my in-laws. That would be such a burden lifted from our family. And that is my desire for everybody who listens to this podcast. But unfortunately, the reality is that relationships take both parties working together. And until that happens, a healthy relationship cannot occur. Both parties have to be seeking out the best for the other. So your parents need to be seeking out what's best for your wife. Your wife should be seeking out what's best for your parents. You, as the husband, should be seeking out what is best for your family first, and not do anything to harm your parents. So that is just a little bit of a background as to who I am, where I'm coming from, and kind of the purpose behind these episodes. And the first one that I want to dig into, I'm calling the comparison exercise and seeing family dynamics from a new and different perspective. As adults, we obviously have a paradigm, a viewpoint, a perspective that we have gained for our entire life. And a lot of times we may be exposed to things that are not really healthy, but because that's what our normal is, we normalize them. So, an extreme example might be someone who grew up in a physically abusive home and thinking that, well, it's normal that a parent should beat their child until they're bruised or bleeding. Well, obviously, that is not a normal or healthy way to have a relationship between parents and children. But if that is how you were raised, you can kind of get rose-colored glasses and see that as, well, that's just how it's always been, and that becomes kind of a normal for you, even though that's not healthy. So the rose-colored glasses is just my way of explaining that how we were raised, the things that were normal for us growing up might not be normal. We might have rose-colored glasses and see them in that way because that's just how we were raised. That's what's normal for us. So the comparison exercise. This is an exercise that I would like for you to try. And it basically involves imagining your in-laws, your wife's family, treating you or doing some of the same behaviors that your family, your parents do towards your wife. Now, the goal of this is not to create a source of conflict. It's not to create some fighting talking points for you and your wife. The idea is just to help create a different perspective, create a new perspective on what's going on. Because a lot of times, like I said, when we have our rose-colored glasses on, we don't really see things very clearly, and we see things through the lens that we were raised. And sometimes those lenses need to be swapped out a little bit. So I'll go through the steps of this exercise, and then I'll give you some examples of what I mean. So the first step in the exercise is to identify a specific interaction or a specific behavior that causes tension in your marriage. So think about if there's any situations where you have noticed some tension with your wife regarding something that your parents have done. Then I want you to take that scenario and I want you to replace the people in that scenario, replace the actors in that scene. Your parents now become your in-laws, your wife's parents, and you put yourself in the situation of your wife. Through this exercise, I want you to imagine what your response would be to these scenarios. If you were in these situations and your in-laws started acting the way your parents have towards your wife, how would you react? And then I want you to take some time to reflect on any kind of differences between your imagined response to what your in-laws were doing versus how your wife has reacted to what your parents have done. So I just want to go through a short list of some common interactions where there might be some tension between your wife and your parents. The first one, unsolicited advice. So this could come in the form of suggestions or advice on housekeeping, on cooking, on how she is raising your children. And often the implication is that the way your wife is doing things is wrong or it's inferior, it's not good enough. Also, when she receives advice or this so-called advice or suggestions in front of others, it often becomes really embarrassing. So let's flip the switch here. Let's imagine that your in-laws, I'm speaking to the husbands here, your in-laws are visiting and your father-in-law starts critiquing your handiwork skills. Maybe you just built a deck. Maybe you just did some landscaping. Maybe you redid the bathroom. Maybe you remodeled a bathroom in the house. And your father-in-law comes in and he starts nitpicking on, well, the tile spacing isn't quite right. There's a little bit of overlap here. There's not even spacing on the tiles in the bathroom. Or maybe he'd say, well, you didn't buy the right kind of wood for the deck. You should have gotten pressure treated. You should have had it stained. You should have had it painted. Or maybe he looks in your yard and he says, well, that kind of grass won't grow there. Why'd you pick that kind of grass? Now imagine your response to that. How would that make you feel? Would that set you off? Would it cause you to feel anger or resentment towards your father-in-law? And would it be embarrassing if he did that at, say, like a family gathering? Maybe you were hosting a birthday party for one of your children and your father-in-law starts nitpicking you in front of your friends. That's a great example of how little things can cause tension. And that's a way for you to kind of understand possibly where your wife is coming from. If she's receiving this kind of unsolicited advice from your parents in terms of housekeeping, child rearing, cooking, baking, whatever she does, her work, maybe she works and your parents don't think she should work. These kinds of things can cause tension. Another example, boundary violations. So what could this be? It could be dropping by unannounced or expecting open door access to your home, rearranging items in your house without your wife's permission, or your parents expecting to be included in all your family decisions or plans. What if we flip the switch and think about how your in-laws, your wife's parents, could have open door access to your home? They could come in at any time. They have a key. They're just in the neighborhood and decided to stop by and drop in, maybe during a time when you were watching football with your boys, having some bonding time, and they barge in and they intrude on that. Or maybe they go into your garage, they go into your office, and they start rearranging things. Perhaps your mother-in-law comes into your office and starts rearranging the books, tidying up your desk, all in the guise of being helpful, but you have things on your desk in a certain way, you have things in your garage a certain way, and now you can't find anything. Or your in-laws expecting to be brought in on any kind of decision. Oh, you're going to move? Oh, well, your in-laws don't think that that is a good neighborhood to move into, or they don't think that that house is suitable, that you should get a bigger house, one that maybe you can't afford. Imagine how that would feel like to have those kind of boundaries violated. And these might be the things that your wife is dealing with. The next one, criticism and comparisons. You may not notice because sometimes when our parents want to say things to hurt someone, they will do things in secret. They will do things when you're not paying attention. And your wife might say, when you were out of the room, your parents said this. So I want you to keep that in mind with this scenario. Making negative comments about your wife's appearance, career, or her background, things that she probably can't help. Then possibly comparing your wife to other family members or to old girlfriends, and then criticizing your wife's family or her upbringing. Now, let's flip the scenario on its head. Let's think about your in-laws coming in and making negative comments about your appearance. Maybe they're saying, well, he's lost a lot of weight. He doesn't look as healthy as he used to. Or maybe, boy, age is really getting to him. He's kind of put on the pounds, hasn't he? Or maybe they say something like, why doesn't he just quit that job if he's working so hard and not getting enough pay, even if you love the job? Why doesn't he do that? Provide better for the family. Or what if they start to criticize your background? Well, in our family, the way we did things was like this. Or, he doesn't have any manners. Doesn't he know the proper way to hold a fork? Now, this might seem absolutely ridiculous or silly, but these kinds of things happen. What if your in-laws started comparing you to your wife's previous boyfriends? How would that make you feel? Or what if your in-laws started criticizing your parents and criticizing how they do things? That's another scenario. Lots of tension. Favoritism and exclusion would be the next one. Maybe your parents exclude your wife from family traditions or inside jokes. I mean, that's easy to kind of play off, but sometimes it's really done to hurt your wife and make her feel isolated. Or what about if your parents make plans with you without including your wife or even considering that she might have different opinions? And then you flip the scenario to where your in-laws, your wife's parents, have preferential treatment toward your wife's sister's kids over yours. Maybe for Christmas, your wife's sister's kids get gifts that are all hundreds of dollars. And when it comes to your kids, they get stuff from the dollar store. Or maybe you get excluded from family traditions. Maybe there's a family portrait. Maybe they're taking pictures at somebody's wedding and you don't get included, even though your wife is in the picture and maybe even your kids, but you're not. Or your wife's parents start making plans for vacation and don't even consider that you've already taken vacation this year, and that means you can't come. Undermining parenting decisions is another source of tension. It could be where your wife feels like your parents don't pay any attention to the rules that you've set for your children. Maybe it's buying gifts, or it could be that your kids are not allowed to play a certain video game, but your parents have bought the video game, they have the console at their house, and your kids are allowed to play this game because they're at grandma's house or because they're at grandpa's house. And what happens at grandma's house is up to her and not you. That's really undermining your authority. Another way that can be really damaging is if your parents are criticizing your wife's parenting choices in front of your children. So that automatically makes her seem like the bad guy. And that's not a place that your parents should step into at all. So let's flip it to your in-laws. Can you imagine what it would feel like if your in-laws started feeding your kids sugary snacks that you don't allow and said, oh, well, that's okay. Grandma says it's okay. Grandpa says it's okay. Or if your wife's parents start buying gifts that you don't allow. Let's say there's a brand of toys that you and your wife had decided are kind of offensive and you don't like them. And your wife's parents decide to get your kids the whole entire set for Christmas or their birthday. Or what if your in-laws started criticizing how you're parenting your kids right in front of them? Let's say you've had to step in and your son is not eating his dinner, and you've stepped in and you've said, son, if you don't eat this, you're not going to get a treat after dinner. You're not going to get a snack before bed. And your in-laws, your wife's parents, step in and they say, don't listen to Daddy. I'll get you a snack when he's not looking. Another one could be possessiveness over you, their son. Sometimes you may hear your mom, seems to be more like the mother saying these, referring to you as her baby or similar possessive terms. She might try to monopolize your time and attention and not allow you to be the husband and father you need to be, whether it's working, whether it's doing things around the home, whether it's spending time with your wife and your children. But there's a possessiveness and a trying to monopolize your time. And then this also has the side effect of making your wife feel like an outsider in her own marriage. So let's look at it from the other perspective. How would you feel if your in-laws always referred to your wife as their baby, or my precious little girl, daddy's little girl. And then they try to take up so much time that your wife can't do what she needs to do around the home. She can't homeschool your kids if you homeschool. She can't take the time to keep up with the house, keep up with the cooking, keep up with the cleaning, keep up with whatever she's normally going to be doing, whatever y'all have agreed is part of her role in the family. She can't do because her parents are monopolizing her time. And what if your in-laws started doing things to make you feel like an outsider in your own marriage? The next one is disrespecting your relationship. Imagine this may be happening with your wife, where she hears comments from your parents that undermine your marriage. Things like bringing up past relationships that you had with other women, other girlfriends, and suggesting that somebody else was better, a better fit for you over your wife. Another thing that's really disrespectful in your relationship is your parents interfering in any kind of marital disagreement. If you and your wife are not getting along and your parents start stepping in and butting their nose in to where it really doesn't belong, that can cause a huge source of tension for your wife. And then if we look at it from your perspective, if your in-laws, if her parents started making comments about your marriage not being that great, I can't understand how you can stand to live with him. He's a deadbeat. Look at how lazy he is. Those kinds of comments. Or saying, that boyfriend you had in high school, he was such an amazing guy. We liked him so much. Whatever happened to him? How's he doing? Is he married? He was a much better fit for you. Y'all had so much in common. Can you imagine hearing that from your in-laws and how that would make you feel? Or what if your wife's parents started calling you after they knew that you and your wife had a disagreement, and they started getting upset with you, calling you on the phone, telling you how wrong you are? Imagine what kind of tension that could cause. Now, the last two, I've kind of gone on longer than I wanted, so I'll kind of skim over these last two. Cultural or religious differences, basically criticizing the traditions or religious beliefs that your wife has, and imagine that happening to you. If you and your wife are from different cultures, there could be some tension there, or pressure to conform to your in-laws' practices. If your parents are pressuring your wife to conform to practices that are different for her, how would that feel if the shoe was on the other foot? Another one would be financial interference. If your parents are offering unsolicited financial advice, or maybe criticizing your wife's spending habits, that is a way that your parents may be trying to control or manipulate your wife. Maybe discussing your finances with other people without your permission. And then what if your in-laws were doing that to you? What if your in-laws were offering you financial advice, saying, well, you shouldn't invest in that. Why did you invest in this stock? Or criticizing your spending habits. Why did he just buy new tools when you need to fix your back porch? Things like that. Using money to control or manipulate your in-laws. Giving you or withholding money to try to manipulate you. And finally, a lack of appreciation. This could look like your parents not really acknowledging your wife's efforts or contributions to family events, taking her help for granted, or not expressing sincere gratitude for gifts or for hospitality. And then imagine that you helped organize a family reunion for your wife's parents, and you found the venue, you hired a band, you did all these things, and you don't get any credit. Not that you're looking for credit, but just a lack of gratitude. Or there's an issue where maybe your in-laws' house got damaged in a storm, and they just take for granted that you're going to come over, bring a chainsaw, bring your tools, and spend however long it takes to clean up their yard. Never mind that you have a job and other responsibilities. So, thinking through each of these scenarios, I want to encourage you to imagine, what would you feel like if your wife's parents treated you this way? And what kind of emotional impact would this have over time? How would this affect your relationship with your wife if she didn't address these things with her parents? And then I want you to think about, what support would you want from your wife in these situations? The benefits of doing this exercise is to help increase your empathy and your understanding for what your wife is going through. Now, we all have double standards, or we all have inconsistencies in the expectations that we have from people. Sometimes we might see things one way for our parents and see things another way for somebody else. And that's pretty normal, but it's not healthy. The benefits of doing this type of exercise allows you to recognize some issues, hopefully in a non-confrontational way. Again, the reason your wife has shared this episode with you is not to incite an argument. It's not to cause more tension. It's just in hopes that you could see things from her perspective, because that's kind of what marriage is about, is loving each other unconditionally and being able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and have compassion for where they are in a certain situation. Now, some of the realizations you might have through this is that, yeah, there are some issues with my parents. And that's okay to realize that. Your wife, if she's shared this with you, she probably desperately wants things to improve with your parents. Otherwise, she wouldn't be sending you this podcast to listen to. She wants things to improve. She wants things to get better. She wants things to change. And sometimes change is a little bit scary. Sometimes it's very hard. But that's how we grow together. That's how our marriage becomes stronger. Discussing these things with your spouse, the key is really to do it with kindness and compassion and gentleness and love. We're not doing this, again, to stir up trouble. We're not doing this to cause you to see your parents in a negative light. No, that's not the purpose of this at all. The purpose is to get you to see things from your wife's perspectives, to see that maybe how you have been raised to see your parents, how you have been trained to see them and react and interact with them, may not be healthy. And that is scary, and it can be intimidating to come to a realization that the way you've always seen things is not exactly how things are. So tread through this as gently as you can for your sake and your wife's sake, so that you can strengthen your marriage and come out of all this in a much better place. Because if there is this kind of tension in your marriage because of how things are with your parents, things are not going to just get better by ignoring them. I can promise you that. I can promise you that from someone who tried to ignore things for over 20 years. The result of me just trying to turn aside and ignore and overlook a lot of things, it ended up with me having some serious health issues that I'm still dealing with 5 years after we went no contact, because I was under so much stress that my body just kind of started to fall apart because of the different stress hormones and how they affected my other hormones. And it was just almost like an avalanche of issues that came up because they weren't addressed. So ignoring these things is not the solution. It's not going to get better over time. unless something is done to change it. And so I hope that you take this episode in the spirit with which I created it, and that was to help develop more unity, more cohesiveness, more compassion in your marriage, and know that your wife, she wants a healthy relationship with your parents. And for whatever reason, she doesn't feel like it's very healthy right now. And she doesn't know or hasn't been able to find the best way to communicate that with you. And so this is her way of reaching out and trying to get you to understand where she's coming from. Again, this is not to get you to decide that your parents are awful. She's just wanting you to see just a little glimpse of how she sees things so that y'all can work together to come up with a solution that works with both of you. So, with that being said, I pray that you will do these exercises together, talk about them, figure out how you can move forward, and go in peace. God bless you. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.